The Ohio wind had a way of biting through every layer of clothing. But that night, it felt colder than it had any right to be. Soraya stood just outside the hospital doors, her body still weak, her stitches pulling with every shaky breath. She clutched newborn Zuri close to her chest, trying to shield her from the sharp winter air. The blanket wrapped around the tiny girl fluttered in the wind, the only warm thing Soraya had left. Behind her, the automatic doors slid open again. John stepped out, refusing to meet her eyes. His family stood behind him, arms folded, faces tight, their judgment louder than the wind. Soraya waited, prayed, begged silently for the man she once trusted to reach for her, to say something human, something that proved he remembered who she was to him. But his voice cut the air like ice. "Just go, Soraya. They don't want you here." Her heart thudded painfully. "They don't want you here. Not the first love you. Not let's talk about it. Not we'll figure this out. Just dismissal. Cold. Final." Soraya blinked hard, willing her tears not to fall onto Zuri's soft cheek. Before she could take a step away, a low hum rolled down the driveway. Headlights swept across the pavement, bright against the dark winter night. A sleek luxury car glided toward the entrance and stopped right beside her. The door opened. A familiar figure stepped out. Henry, not rushed, not confused, not hesitant. He looked at Soraya with a shock that wasn't pity. It was pain. The kind someone feels when they realize something terrible has happened to a person they care about deeply. The contrast hit like lightning. John turning away, Henry stepping forward. Two men, two choices, two different hearts. Before we go deeper, let me ask you something real. What would you do if the people who promised to love you pushed you away at your weakest moment? Have you ever been judged unfairly by someone who was supposed to protect you? Because this is what happened to Soraya. This is the story of a woman who lost everything in one night. Her marriage, her home, her support, yet gained something she never imagined life would return to her. Stay with me to the end, because the truth behind why this billionaire showed up at that exact moment will not only surprise you, it might just heal something in you too. Before we begin, please like this video and comment "I'm ready." It truly helps YouTube share powerful stories like this with more people. Welcome back to Mr. George Stories, where life's most powerful lessons come wrapped in unforgettable tales. If you're new to this family, thank you for joining us. Please hit the subscribe button, because it helps us share stories like this on YouTube. Henry didn't rush towards Soraya. He didn't want to frighten her or make assumptions about what she needed. Instead, he stepped closer with a quiet calm that felt out of place in the harsh winter air. "Soraya, are you all right?" he asked softly, though her trembling arms already answered the question. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. The cold stole her breath, and heartbreak stole her voice. John saw Henry, but didn't move. His family whispered behind him, pretending their actions had no weight, pretending a mother holding a newborn in the night chill wasn't worth more than their opinions. Henry looked from Soraya to the tiny bundle pressed against her chest. "Is the baby okay?" His voice was careful, tender in a way she hadn't heard in months. Soraya nodded, even though she wasn't entirely sure. Her body hurt. Her heart hurt more. Everything about the moment felt unreal. Henry took off his coat and stepped close enough to wrap it around her shoulders, keeping his hands respectful and light. The warmth hit her like relief she never asked for but desperately needed. John's mother scoffed softly. John turned his back again. Henry's jaw tightened, but he didn't say anything. He wasn't here to fight them. He was here because Soraya was standing in the cold with a newborn, and that was all the reason he needed. "Let me help you," Henry said quietly. "Please." Soraya swallowed hard. She didn't trust her voice, so she just nodded. The wind picked up. Zuri whimpered softly. Henry opened the car door, shielding Soraya and the baby from the cold as much as possible. She moved slowly, each step a reminder of the hours she had just spent bringing a life into the world. Henry supported her elbow without gripping it. A small gesture, a respectful one, a human one. Behind them, John didn't say her name, not once, not even as she stepped into another man's car, exhausted and heartbroken. The door closed gently. Henry walked around to the driver's side. The car pulled away from the hospital, leaving John behind in the glow of the entry lights. The same man who told her to leave, now watching someone else show the care he should have given. But that moment, that turning point, was only the beginning. The farther Henry drove from the hospital, the quieter the world became. The snow fell in slow flakes across the windshield, softening every streetlight, turning the Ohio night into something that looked peaceful, even though Soraya felt anything but. She kept her eyes on Zuri, brushing a thumb across the baby's cheek. Zuri breathed softly, unaware of the chaos she'd been born into. Henry glanced at Soraya in the rearview mirror. He didn't stare, just checked on her the way someone does when they're worried but trying not to push. "You're safe here," he said gently. "No one is going to speak to you the way they did tonight." It was strange, hearing reassurance from a man she hadn't seen in years, instead of the husband she shared a home with. Strange and painful. Soraya cleared her throat, trying to hold on to her dignity despite the weight in her chest. "I'm sorry you had to come all this way," she whispered. Henry shook his head. "You don't owe me an apology. Not for needing help. Not ever." His tone was simple, not dramatic, not exaggerated, but sincere in a way that pressed against the ache inside her. For the first time since John uttered those cold words, Soraya felt something shift. Not hope, not trust, just a moment where her breathing didn't hurt as much. She leaned back slowly, each muscle reminding her of the hours she'd spent giving birth. The exhaustion sank deep, settling in her bones. Henry noticed. "You're worn out," he said, voice softer now. "Let me take you somewhere warm. You don't have to explain anything tonight." Another breath trembled out of her. She didn't have the strength to hide her truth. "I don't understand why he did that," she murmured. I thought he'd at least wait until I healed." Henry gripped the steering wheel a little tighter. He didn't speak for a moment. Not because he didn't have words, but because he chose them carefully. "No one deserves that," he said finally. "Not after what you just went through. Not after bringing a child into the world." Soraya blinked back tears. Her throat tightened again. "What am I supposed to do now?" she whispered. The question wasn't meant for Henry. It was meant for life itself, for fate, for anyone who had an answer. Henry's response came after a quiet pause. "You're going to rest. You're going to breathe. And you're not going to face this night alone." His words landed gently, settling over her like the coat he'd placed on her shoulders earlier. Warm, steady, protective. Outside, the city lights passed slowly. Inside, the warmth of the car wrapped around Soraya and Zuri, giving them a pocket of peace they hadn't felt in hours. The night that began with heartbreak was already changing direction. Not completely, not instantly, but enough for Soraya to realize one truth. Someone cared. Someone showed up. Someone refused to let her disappear into the cold. And as the car turned toward Henry's side of town, the side she never imagined she'd see again, the story truly began. The pain came in waves that tightened every muscle in Soraya's body, rolling through her from spine to stomach until she had no choice but to grip the sides of the hospital bed. The room smelled faintly of disinfectant, and the overhead lights felt too bright, too sharp against her strained eyes. She breathed through another contraction, the kind that made her toes curl and her voice tremble, even though she tried to stay strong. A nurse spoke gently to her, reminding her to breathe. But Soraya barely heard anything other than the pounding in her ears and the worry rising in her chest. She wasn't afraid of childbirth. She was afraid of what waited outside that delivery room. John hadn't been himself for months. She felt it every time she reached for his hand, and he pretended not to notice. Every time she asked a question, and his answers came late or short. But here, in this moment when she needed him most, she hoped something in him would come alive. The old version of the man she chose. She looked toward the corner where he stood. John wasn't beside her. He wasn't holding her hand. He was pacing, back and forth, arms crossed tightly across his chest, eyes darting toward the door as if he were waiting for someone else to walk in. His footsteps were almost louder than her breathing. Another contraction hit. Soraya clenched her jaw, pushing through the wave of pain. Sweat trickled from her forehead, and she whispered to herself, "You can do this. Just breathe." But the pain wasn't the worst part. The worst part was knowing John's family was already in the hallway. A group she had never been able to please, no matter how hard she tried. Their opinions came with sharp tones, always wrapped in the suggestion that she wasn't enough, not polished enough, not obedient enough, not compliant enough. She had spent years trying to rise above it. She never imagined their voices would follow her into the delivery room. Another contraction surged. She cried out softly, gripping the bed rails. John finally glanced at her, but only for a moment. His eyes flicked away quickly, like he couldn't handle the weight of witnessing her pain. "Are you okay?" he asked quietly. But the words lacked the warmth she used to know. "I'm trying," she whispered, her breath shaky. He didn't come closer. He didn't touch her hand. He didn't offer support. He continued pacing. Soraya swallowed the hurt. Labor was already overwhelming. She didn't have the strength to carry emotional pain, too. But something inside her, that gut instinct she always trusted, whispered that something wasn't right. She wanted to believe this was just stress, that John was nervous, that he cared, but didn't know how to show it. But she saw the stiffness in his shoulders, the way he avoided her eyes, the way he flinched every time footsteps echoed outside the door. Another nurse checked her progress. "You're almost there, Soraya," she said encouragingly. "You're doing beautifully." Beautiful wasn't how Soraya felt. She felt split between two worlds, the one where she was bringing life into the world, and the one where her marriage felt like it was slipping through her fingers. When it was finally time to push, she gathered every ounce of strength left in her body. Pain shot through her. Her vision blurred. Her breath came fast and uneven. She pushed again and again and again, until a soft cry cut through the room. The nurse lifted a tiny, warm, perfect little girl into Soraya's trembling arms. Zuri, her daughter. Small cheeks, tiny hands, a faint newborn scent that made Soraya's heart flutter with relief and joy, so pure it drowned everything else for a moment. Tears streamed down her face as she pressed her cheek against Zuri's tiny forehead. "Hi, baby," she whispered. "Mama's here." For the first time in hours, Soraya felt complete, but the moment didn't last. The door opened, and a nurse stepped aside to let John's family in. They didn't smile. They didn't congratulate her. They didn't look at Zuri with warmth. Their faces tightened, disapproval shaping their features before they even spoken. His mother stepped forward first. Her eyes scanned Soraya, then dropped to Zuri. A slow frown formed. Soraya's stomach twisted. She pulled Zuri closer, instinctive, protective. His mother didn't touch the baby. Instead, she whispered something to John, something quiet, sharp, and cruel enough that Soraya saw John's face tense immediately. He didn't correct his mother. He didn't defend Soraya. He didn't ask her to stop. He just lowered his eyes. Soraya's heart thudded painfully. She didn't know what was said, but she didn't need the exact words. She could feel the judgment pressing against her, as cold as the winter night waiting outside. She sensed a shift in the room, a heaviness, a closing-in feeling. Zuri whimpered softly, unaware of the tension. Soraya breathed deeply and kissed her daughter's forehead, her voice trembling as she whispered, "You're safe with me." But even as she said it, she sensed something was unraveling between her and John. A distance, a weakness, a hint that he might not stand beside her when she needed him. And deep inside, a tiny warning formed. This night is not what you hoped it would be. The room felt smaller the moment John's family stepped inside, as if their presence alone pushed the air out of the space. Soraya tightened her hold on Zuri, instinctively shifting her body to shield the baby from the coldness in their expressions. John lingered near the foot of the bed, rubbing his palms together, his gaze fixed on the floor. He looked like a man caught between two fires. One he vowed to protect, and one he never had the courage to stand against. His mother leaned close to him, her voice sharp but hushed. She planned this. Look at her. She knew exactly what she was doing. Soraya couldn't hear every word, but she saw the way John's shoulders drew inward, as if his mother's remarks dug straight into his confidence. He swallowed hard, his fingers twitching near his wedding ring. "Mom, not now," John muttered under his breath, but the words came out weak, almost apologetic. Not now, she whispered back. When then? You think we didn't notice how she controls everything? You think we didn't see how she pulls you away from your own family? This is not the future we wanted for you. Soraya felt her stomach tighten, but she refused to let tears form. She had been through enough in life to know when people were determined not to see her humanity. Still, hearing such bitterness on the day she had given life, that cut deeper than she expected. John finally lifted his gaze to hers. For a moment, Soraya hoped, truly hoped, he would step forward, tell his family to leave, remind them this was a moment for healing and celebration, not insult. But instead, he hesitated. That hesitation told her everything. His mother placed a hand on his shoulder. Do what you need to do, she said quietly, with a finality Soraya could feel across the room. John inhaled deeply. John? Soraya whispered, her voice barely audible. He walked toward her bedside with stiff movements, as if every step weighed heavier than the last. His eyes didn't hold anger. They held fear, the kind that comes from being controlled for so long. You no longer know how to think for yourself. I don't want to do this, he said quietly, but my family. They said. Soraya's breath caught. No, John, please. Not right now. Not after. He raised a hand gently, but it wasn't a comforting gesture. It was a sign that he had already made a decision. My family thinks. His voice cracked for a moment. They think this isn't a good environment for them. They want you to leave the hospital. Everything stopped moving. Even the machines around her seemed quieter. Soraya blinked slowly, trying to process the words. She had imagined painful moments in her life, but never this. Not after giving birth. Not while holding the child she risked her life to bring into the world. You want me to leave? She whispered, unable to hide the disbelief in her voice. John looked away. It's just until things calm down, he murmured. They're upset. They don't feel comfortable. Soraya shook her head, tears gathering despite her resistance. This is our child, John. Our daughter. Why would they be uncomfortable with me holding the baby I just delivered? Why would they want me out? His mother answered before he could. We're not dealing with drama today. She can take the child and leave now. We need space. The words stung worse than the labor pains. A nearby nurse paused mid-step, her eyebrows lifting in shock. She opened her mouth as if to object, but she hesitated. Hospital staff had limits. They couldn't interfere in personal disputes unless safety was at risk. Still, her expression said everything Soraya lacked the energy to say. John, don't do this, Soraya pleaded softly. Not today. Please. John's jaw tightened, but not out of strength, out of surrender. I'm sorry, Soraya. Those 4 words were the final push, not for childbirth, but into heartbreak. Another nurse approached cautiously. Ma'am, are you sure you're ready to walk? Soraya wiped her eyes and nodded. She wasn't ready. She wasn't healed. She wasn't stable. But she could not stay in a room with people who treated her like she was a burden. She adjusted Zuri in her arms, holding her close to her chest. The tiny girl whimpered softly, sensing the distress in her mother's heartbeat. Using the bedrail for support, Soraya stood, slowly, painfully, with her entire body trembling from exhaustion. The stitches pulled sharply with each movement, but she gritted her teeth. If she had to walk into the cold with her newborn, she would. She had done harder things in life. She would survive this too. A nurse offered her a blanket. It's freezing outside, she said quietly. Please take this. Soraya gave her a small nod of gratitude. Even in the darkest moments, kindness had a way of finding its way through. She stepped toward the door, her legs unsteady. The hospital hallway stretched out in front of her like a long, unwelcome road. She didn't look back at John. She couldn't. If she did, she might fall apart entirely. When the doors slid open, a blast of cold air hit her face with biting force. Snowflakes clung to her eyelashes. Zuri whimpered again, and Soraya adjusted the blanket around her daughter, whispering gentle reassurance. Mommy's here. I've got you. She stepped onto the sidewalk. The pavement was slick, the wind unkind, the night far too quiet. But she kept walking, step by step, breath by breath. Pain and determination layered one on top of the other. This wasn't the ending she imagined when she entered the hospital hours ago. Moral commentary. Sometimes the people we trust to hold us up reveal they were never strong enough to do so. Sometimes life removes those who cannot walk with us, so we learn to walk without them. Soraya didn't know what waited beyond that sidewalk, but she knew one thing. Leaving wasn't weakness, it was survival. The night Soraya stepped out of the hospital, clutching newborn Zuri while shielding her from the freezing Ohio air, something else was happening on the opposite side of Columbus. Something she could never have predicted. High above the city, inside the towering glass headquarters of a company known for its clean, modern architecture and relentless pace, Henry sat at the end of a long conference table. Papers and charts were spread in front of him, and a dozen executives studied him with the quiet intensity of people waiting for a decision. Henry listened, but his attention was slightly off. His mind floated somewhere else, somewhere years back, to a woman whose laughter once softened parts of him he didn't know existed. He had buried that connection the day she chose another man, choosing distance over disruption. But even distance could not erase memory. A notification blinked on the tablet beside him. He ignored it at first. A second notification flashed. Then a third. Henry frowned, sliding the tablet closer. It was from the Maternal Care Foundation he funded, a program designed to flag mothers who might need assistance due to instability, early discharge, or lack of support. Patient flagged. Soraya Williams' reason. Early discharge with newborn. No partner listed. High-risk indicators present. Henry blinked hard, heart thudding. He reread the alert. Once, twice, a third time. No partner listed. Discharged alone. Late at night. With a newborn. Everything inside him tightened. His assistant noticed his sudden stillness. "Mr. Harrington, are we losing you?" she asked softly. He didn't answer. He didn't even look up. He slammed the tablet shut and stood abruptly. "Cancel the rest of this meeting." The room froze. "Sir, we still have." "Cancel it," he repeated, already reaching for his coat. "I have something more urgent." Executives exchanged confused looks. Henry never skipped meetings. He was structured, consistent, a man who lived by precision. But tonight there was no calculation in his decision. There was only instinct. The elevator ride felt too slow. Traffic lights felt too long. Even the sound of his engine warming up felt delayed. His thoughts raced faster than his car. Why was she alone? Where was John? Why would anyone send a woman home hours after childbirth? Why wasn't she listed as having support? He had trusted distance all these years, believing that staying away was the respectful choice. But distance felt foolish now. Distance felt cruel. He tapped the steering wheel anxiously as he neared the hospital. When he arrived, he didn't need directions or guesses. He saw her immediately. She was standing under the soft glow of the entrance lights, holding Zuri close, her shoulders hunched from cold and exhaustion. The hospital blanket wrapped around her fluttered in the wind. Snowflakes landed on her hair, clinging to her like the night was pressing down on her. She was alone, so painfully alone. Henry's breath caught. He stepped out of his car, the door closing behind him with a muted sound. Slowly, carefully, he walked toward her, afraid that if he moved too quickly, she might break even further. "Soraya?" Her head lifted slightly, her eyes wide but dull with fatigue. She looked at him as though she wasn't sure whether he was real or a memory. "Henry?" Her voice trembled. He nodded once, his throat tightening. He hadn't seen her in years, yet the sight of her now, fragile, trembling, fighting to hold herself together, made an old ache flare inside him. He stepped closer, noticing the shiver in her arms. "You're freezing." He reached for his coat, draping it gently around her shoulders, careful not to disturb Zuri. Soraya's lips parted, but she didn't speak. "What happened?" he asked softly. A single tear slid down her cheek. Not a dramatic cry, just the kind of tear that escapes despite a person's strongest efforts to stay composed. He didn't push for details. He didn't ask where John was. He didn't need to. The absence of a husband beside a woman who had just given birth spoke louder than any explanation. Henry glanced at Zuri, tiny, warm, wrapped in a blanket far too thin for a night like this. "She's cold," Henry murmured, concern threading through every word. "Let me help you." Soraya shook her head slightly, as if unsure whether she deserved help, whether accepting it meant admitting how broken the night had become. I don't know what to do," she whispered. Henry's chest tightened. He stepped closer, not enough to overwhelm her, but enough to let her know she wasn't alone. "You're not doing this by yourself," he said gently. "Not tonight. Not any night if you don't want to." Her breath hitched. He extended a hand toward her elbow, supporting her in a way that didn't force closeness, but offered stability. "Soraya." His voice softened even more. "You don't have to walk alone." Her tears fell faster this time, not from romance, not from attachment, but from relief. The unbearable kind of relief that comes when someone finally shows up after everyone else walked away. Zuri whimpered again, and Soraya adjusted the blanket around her daughter, her hands shaking from exhaustion. Henry opened the rear door of his car. "Let me take you somewhere warm," he said. "Please." For a long second, Soraya didn't move. Then she nodded, not because she was healed, not because everything was solved, but because she was tired of surviving without support. She stepped toward the car. Henry shielded her from the wind as she eased into the back seat, cradling Zuri gently. When Henry closed the door, he paused, staring at the hospital entrance, at the cold sidewalk where she had stood moments earlier. The thought pulsed through him. She should never have been out here alone. He walked around to the driver's side, got in, started the engine, and pulled away from the hospital, carrying Soraya and Zuri into a night that would change all their lives. The warmth of the car wrapped around them. Zuri sighed softly. Soraya leaned her head back, eyes closing with exhaustion. Henry glanced at her in the rearview mirror. He didn't say anything, but his expression said everything. He had come because he cared, and he wasn't leaving her again. The car's heater hummed softly as Henry pulled away from the hospital. Warmth slowly filled the interior, replacing the bite of the winter air Soraya had endured far too long. Snow drifted across the windshield in gentle waves, catching the glow of passing streetlights as the car moved through Columbus. Soraya sat in the back seat, her arms wrapped around Zuri, holding her daughter close, as if that alone could shield them from everything that had happened tonight. Her body ached. Her stitches tugged with every shift, and exhaustion weighed down her eyelids, but her mind wouldn't rest. Her world had broken open only hours earlier, and now she was sitting in the car of a man she once cared about. A man who showed up when her own husband didn't. Henry drove with measured care, hands steady on the wheel, jaw tight. He didn't speak at first. He didn't pry or demand explanations. He simply focused on the snowy road ahead, giving Soraya space to breathe, to exist, to fall apart if she needed to. But sometimes silence carried more weight than sound. Every few seconds, Henry glanced in the rearview mirror, not in a way that pressured her, but checking, quietly, gently, making sure she was still upright, still holding Zuri, still conscious after the physical strain she had endured. Soraya cleared her throat, but no words followed. She didn't trust her voice. She didn't trust her strength. She wasn't even sure she trusted reality. Henry picked up on it immediately. "You don't have to talk right now," he said softly. "Just breathe. We'll get you somewhere warm." His voice had always been like that, calm, steady, offering comfort without forcing closeness. But tonight, his tone carried something extra, something tight, something pained. The roads of Columbus were quiet at this hour. Snow blanketed the sidewalks, muffling the city's usual noise. Streetlights reflected off wet pavement, creating long lines of gold stretching ahead of them. Buildings stood tall and dark, windows glowing faintly from the few residents still awake. Soraya watched it all through the fogging glass, her breath shallow. This wasn't where she imagined she would be after giving birth. She had pictured something entirely different. John holding her hand, warm blankets, a quiet room filled with relief and joy, a future they were supposed to build together. But now she was watching the city pass by from the back seat of a car driven by the only person who cared enough to stop. A lump formed in her throat. She blinked fast. She didn't want to cry again, but flashbacks pushed in anyway. John, lost in his phone, while she packed her hospital bag, his mother's voice criticizing her choices, the cold stare when she asked him to time her contractions, the way he paced during labor, distant and restless, the moment he told her to leave. Each memory cut deeper than the last. She tightened her grip on Zuri. Henry noticed. "Soraya?" he murmured, keeping his eyes on the road. "She's warm enough back there?" Soraya lowered her cheek to her daughter's forehead. Zuri's skin felt soft and warm, thank God. "She's okay," she whispered. "She's better than I am." A pause, a quiet breath from Henry. Then, with gentle firmness, "You went through too much tonight. More than anyone should." Soraya swallowed hard. "I'll be fine." He didn't challenge her, but the slight shake of his head in the mirror said he didn't believe it. Henry's fingers tightened on the wheel for a moment before he relaxed them again. He wanted to comfort her, desperately, but he held himself back. He knew pushing too much right now could make her retreat further, and Henry was many things, but careless was never one of them. As they crossed through a residential area, Christmas decorations glowed softly on porches. Inflatable snowmen danced slightly in the wind. A family's living room window revealed children laughing around a tree. Soraya stared at the scene until her eyes blurred. The contrast hit her deeply. Those homes were filled with warmth, connection, celebration. She had walked out of a hospital into a night full of coldness, rejection, and pain. Her voice cracked even in her own thoughts. Why wasn't I worth kindness to the people I called family? She lowered her gaze, unable to look at the passing homes anymore. Henry noticed again. He didn't ask what she was thinking. He didn't need to. He had known her long enough to understand when she was crying on the inside. He exhaled softly. "I wish I could take something from you," he said quietly. "Something heavy. Something that's hurting you right now." Soraya closed her eyes. Her voice shook. "You can't fix what happened." "I know," he replied, "but I won't let you face it alone." She pressed her lips together, holding back tears. Henry's jaw tightened again. He fought the urge to reach back and touch her hand. Just a small squeeze of reassurance. But he didn't. He respected boundaries, even when he hated them. The car turned onto a quiet street, lined with tall trees dusted in snow. Their branches hung low, lit by soft streetlight. The glow reflected off the snowbanks, casting warm tones across the road. The atmosphere felt calm, peaceful, safe. Something Soraya hadn't felt since before labor began. Henry lowered his voice even more. "You're doing better than you think." Soraya let out a soft, broken laugh. "I'm barely holding myself together." "Then let me hold the rest," he said. "Just until you can breathe again." Her heart tugged at those words, not romantically, but humanly. Someone was finally offering her a place to rest. Zuri fussed softly in her arms. Soraya rocked her gently, whispering, "Mommy's here. Mommy's here." Even though she needed reassurance just as much as her daughter did. She leaned her head against the seat, exhaustion closing in. Henry kept glancing at her in the mirror. "You can sleep if you need to," he said. "I'm afraid to close my eyes," she whispered. "Why?" "Because if I fall apart, I won't be able to put myself back together." Henry's voice softened to a whisper. "You don't have to put yourself together tonight." The car slowed as they turned toward Henry's neighborhood, a place of large homes, wide driveways, and quiet streets. Not loud wealth, not flashy wealth, just quiet stability. The kind of stability Soraya hadn't felt in a long time. As they approached his home, Soraya felt the weight of the day settle deeper. She looked down at Zuri, small and innocent, unaware that her life had already shifted so drastically. She brushed a kiss onto her daughter's forehead. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm trying." Henry heard the break in her voice. He didn't turn around, but his tone carried the truth anyway. "You're not failing. You're surviving." And with those steady words, the car rolled gently toward the driveway, carrying a woman who had been pushed out in the cold into the first place that finally felt safe. The driveway lights illuminated the path as Henry guided the car to a smooth stop. Snowflakes drifted slowly in the air, settling on the hood before melting in soft specks of white. The night was quiet here. No shouting, no judgment, no bitter words cutting the air the way they had at the hospital. For the first time since labor began, Soraya felt a small pocket of stillness. Henry stepped out of the car immediately, circling around to open the rear door. He didn't rush, didn't move with pity, didn't make her feel small. Instead, he opened the door with gentle intention, creating a space for her to breathe. His voice was soft. "Take your time. I'll help however you need." Soraya shifted Zuri carefully, pain tugging at her stitches. She braced herself against the seat, willing her trembling legs not to give out. Henry extended a steady hand, but waited for her permission before touching her. She met his eyes, nodded once. He helped her rise, but his grip stayed light, enough to guide, never to control. Her muscles protested the movement, but she steadied herself, pulling the blanket tighter around Zuri. Cold air brushed her cheeks as she stepped out. The contrast between this quiet, warm-lit driveway and the hospital sidewalk she'd been abandoned on struck her instantly. It almost didn't feel real. Henry's expression softened when he noticed the way she clutched Zuri. "Let's get you both inside," he said. He pressed a keypad near the front door, and the lock clicked softly. Warm air rushed out as he opened it, carrying the faint scent of cedar and something baked earlier in the evening. Maybe his housekeeper had cooked before leaving. The entrance was spacious, but not extravagant. The floors were polished, the lighting warm, and the decor simple. Clean lines, soft neutrals, nothing overwhelming. It didn't feel like the home of a man flaunting wealth. It felt like a place someone lived quietly. "Come on," he murmured. "Your room is just down the hall." He walked beside her at a slow pace, making sure her steps were steady. Soraya took in the surroundings as they moved. Framed photographs of landscapes, shelves lined with books, dim lighting creating a calm atmosphere. Everything here felt intentional, peaceful. She exhaled shakily. "This is what safety feels like," her mind whispered. A place without raised voices, a place without judgment, a place where help didn't come with demands. They reached a door halfway down the hall. Henry opened it gently. Soft light greeted them from a lamp on a bedside table. The guest suite was spacious but comforting. A neatly made bed with thick blankets, a small seating area near the window, and a bassinet placed near the wall, as though someone had prepared for a baby long before she arrived. Soraya blinked in surprise. Is this for us?" she asked quietly. Henry nodded. "I had my assistant get it ready as soon as I received the alert. I didn't know the details, but something told me you would need a place to rest." Her throat tightened. She looked down at Zuri, brushing her tiny cheek. She hadn't expected that anyone, especially someone she hadn't seen in years, would think this far ahead. Henry stepped aside to let her enter first. Soraya moved slowly, her body protesting each step. Once inside the room, she paused in the center, overwhelmed. The warmth of the air felt like a blanket, and the lighting was dim enough to soothe her overstimulated senses. She lowered herself onto the edge of the bed with a soft exhale. Henry quietly retrieved a small folded blanket from the bassinet. "She should be snug. The night is colder than usual." His tone wasn't assuming. It was thoughtful. He extended the blanket toward her, but again, he waited for her to take it. He didn't drape it over her without permission. He didn't step closer than necessary. He was giving her control, something she hadn't felt in months. Soraya took the blanket, wrapping Zuri in it carefully. The baby blinked sleepily, her tiny lips parting in a soft yawn. Henry watched, not with pity, not with longing, but with concern and quiet admiration. The sight of Soraya holding her daughter stirred something deep in him, but he pushed it down. Tonight was not about him. It was about her survival. "Thank you," Soraya whispered, her voice barely audible. Henry pulled a chair closer, but didn't sit. "You don't owe me any thanks. You needed help. I was available." Her breath trembled. "Still, you didn't have to come." His gaze softened. "I did." Silence settled between them, warm and delicate. Zuri squirmed, nudging her tiny fists against Soraya's chest. Instinctively, Soraya positioned the baby to feed. Her hands shook, not from lack of skill. She simply hadn't had a chance to rest or process anything since giving birth. Henry turned slightly, giving her privacy without making it awkward. He stepped toward the window, facing away. "You can sit," Soraya murmured. "You don't have to stand." He nodded and took a seat in the chair near the dresser, still angled away enough to make her comfortable. As Zuri fed, a quiet peace settled over the room. The rhythmic sound of her tiny breaths and soft swallowing seemed to ground Soraya in a way nothing else had all night. But the calm nudged something loose inside her. Tears gathered. She blinked hard, willing them back. But exhaustion pushed past her defenses. A soft sob escaped, one she tried desperately to swallow. Henry didn't move. He didn't turn abruptly or crowd her. He simply spoke gently. "Soraya, you're allowed to let it out." Her breath wavered. "I don't want to cry again." "You've carried more than any person should tonight," he said. "Crying won't make you weak." She kept her eyes lowered as tears slid down her cheeks, falling onto Zuri's blanket. She felt both ashamed and relieved. Ashamed for breaking in front of someone she hadn't seen in years. Relieved because she wasn't alone in the dark. "I don't know how to process any of this," she whispered. "You don't have to figure it out tonight," Henry replied. "You just had a child. You were pushed into the cold before you even had time to breathe. That's more than enough for one day." Soraya wiped her cheeks, but tears kept coming. Her shoulders trembled as she held her daughter close. Henry kept his distance, his hands clasped in his lap, knuckles pale with restraining the urge to comfort her physically. "I'm not going to crowd you," he said softly, "but I'll stay right here in case you need anything." Those words, simple, grounded, respectful, undid her. She wasn't used to someone offering comfort without expectations. She wasn't used to being allowed to fall apart without criticism waiting at the door. She wasn't used to safety. Her voice cracked. "Henry, why are you being so kind to me?" He hesitated, searching for words that wouldn't overwhelm her. "Because you deserve it," he said finally, "and because no one should ever face pain alone." Soraya lowered her forehead to Zuri's head, letting her tears fall freely now. The baby stayed calm, nestled against her, unaware that her mother's heart was breaking and healing in the same breath. Henry didn't move, didn't interrupt, didn't make the moment about anything except giving Soraya space. Minutes passed. Zuri finished feeding and drifted off again, her tiny chest rising and falling in soft rhythm. Soraya's body sagged with exhaustion, her strength depleted. Henry spoke gently again. "Lay back. Rest. I'll stay nearby." Soraya eased herself onto the pillows, adjusting Zuri on her chest. Her eyes fluttered from fatigue, her breaths slowing as her body finally began to shut down for the night. Henry dimmed the lamp. He stepped toward the door, pausing. "If you need me, just call." Soraya managed a weak nod. As Henry closed the door halfway, leaving it open just enough in case she needed help, he glanced back once more. She was already drifting off. A soft warmth filled his chest. She wasn't alone anymore. Not tonight. Not as long as he had the strength to stand by her. Soraya didn't sleep long. Her body begged for rest, but her mind refused. Every time her eyes shut, she saw something painful. John pacing, his mother's glare, the moment he told her to leave. The echo of his words clung to her chest, like a weight she couldn't lift. She blinked awake in the guest suite, breathing slowly, adjusting her hold on Zuri, who slept peacefully on her chest. The room was dim, except for a sliver of warm hallway light. Soraya shifted slightly. A soft knock sounded at the door. Not urgent, not demanding, just gentle. "Come in," she whispered. Henry stepped inside, but only far enough to see her clearly. He still maintained distance, respecting every boundary she might not even be able to voice yet. His expression softened when he saw how awake she looked. "I thought you might be trying to sleep," he said. "I tried," she murmured. "It didn't last." Henry nodded slowly, stepping inside just enough to pull the chair closer. He sat, leaning forward slightly, hands clasped in front of him. "Is it all right if I stay for a bit?" he asked. She nodded. "Yes." A quiet calm filled the space as the house settled around them, the soft hum of the heating system, the faint ticking of a decorative clock, and Zuri's gentle breathing. Henry looked at the sleeping newborn. "She's beautiful." Soraya smiled tiredly. brushing a thumb over Zuri's tiny hand. She is. She really is. Another quiet moment passed before Henry spoke again. When you're ready, he said softly, you can tell me what happened. At your own pace. Soraya inhaled slowly, her chest tightening. She didn't know if she was ready, but her heart was heavy with words she hadn't been allowed to speak, words she had swallowed for months, just to keep peace in a home that no longer felt like one. She stared at the blanket covering her daughter, gathering her strength. It started long before tonight, she whispered. Henry remained still, listening with the kind of attention that made a person feel safe enough to break. John wasn't always like this, she said. When we first married, he tried. He really tried. He cared about being there for me, but after a while, it was like he needed to be accepted by his family more than he needed to show up for me. Henry didn't interrupt. They never liked me, she continued quietly. They never hid it. They didn't like how I grew up, where I'm from, how independent I was. They had an idea of what a wife should look like, and I just wasn't it. Her voice cracked slightly. I thought things would change when I got pregnant. I hoped the baby would soften them. But it got worse. Every decision I made became something they criticized. She closed her eyes, remembering the tension that never seemed to stop. During labor, I could feel it. Something was off with John. He kept stepping out of the room. He wouldn't look at me. Every time he checked his phone, he looked more stressed than supportive. Henry's jaw tightened subtly. When Zuri was born, Soraya said, her voice unsteady, I waited for him to smile. I waited for him to hold her, but he didn't even reach for her. Her breath trembled. His mother came in before I even had a chance to rest. She looked at me like I'd ruined something sacred. She said things I wouldn't say to an enemy, let alone someone holding a newborn. Henry leaned forward slightly, but not enough to pressure her. And John just stood there, she whispered. He didn't defend me. He didn't tell her to stop. He just listened. A single tear slipped down her cheek and fell onto Zuri's blanket. When he told me to leave, her voice shook harder. It wasn't just the betrayal. It was the fact that he didn't even hesitate. He didn't care that I could barely stand. He didn't care that Zuri needed warmth, or that I hadn't even recovered yet. He just wanted me gone. Henry's eyes darkened with a quiet ache. His hands balled into fists in his lap before he forced them to relax. Soraya, he said softly, no one should ever experience that. Not ever. She wiped her cheek with the back of her hand. I keep asking myself what I did wrong. You didn't do anything wrong, Henry said firmly. This wasn't your failure. Her lips quivered. It feels like I wasn't enough. Henry exhaled slowly, his voice lowering. You were more than enough. You always were. She looked up at him, eyes red from crying and exhaustion. Why did you care so much? She asked quietly. Why did you come for me tonight? Henry hesitated, his expression softening with something raw but controlled. Because when someone matters, he said finally, you don't turn away when they're hurting. Soraya held his gaze, her breath slowing. He continued softly. I kept up with your work over the years. Not closely. Just enough to know you were okay. I didn't reach out because I respected your life. But when that alert came, when I saw you had been discharged alone, something in me couldn't sit still. He swallowed. I didn't show up because of the past. I showed up because you deserved someone who wouldn't leave you standing in the cold. Soraya's heart twisted. No one had said anything like that to her in a long time. She looked down at Zuri, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't know anyone cared. Henry leaned back slightly, his expression soft but sure. You don't have to be strong alone anymore, he said. Not while I'm here. Her breath caught. The words weren't romantic. They weren't a confession. They were a promise, steady and grounded. She whispered, I don't know what tomorrow will look like. You don't have to, Henry said gently. Tonight is enough. Rest. Breathe. Let yourself feel safe. Soraya blinked slowly, overwhelmed by exhaustion and emotion. Henry, she whispered, yes, thank you. Not for rescuing me, but for seeing me. Henry's voice softened to almost a whisper. Soraya, you are not alone anymore. Silence wrapped around them. Not heavy, not painful, but warm. The kind of silence that comes when someone has finally been heard completely. Zuri stirred lightly. Soraya adjusted her daughter with gentle hands, feeling a small new steadiness inside her. Henry stood slowly. I'll let you rest. I'll be right outside. She nodded, her eyes following him as he stepped into the hallway. When the door closed halfway behind him, Soraya exhaled, long and trembling. For the first time since giving birth, she felt like she wasn't standing in the storm by herself. Morning arrived slowly in Henry's home, not with blaring sunlight or noise, but with a soft, warm glow slipping through the curtains of the guest suite. The Ohio winter sun was gentle today, as if it understood that the woman in the room deserved a rare kind of peace. Soraya stirred for the first time in hours, her eyes fluttering open to a quiet, still space. For a brief moment, she didn't know where she was. The ceiling didn't belong to the hospital. The sheets felt too soft, too warm. The scent in the air didn't remind her of antiseptic or anxiety. And then she remembered Zuri. Her hand shot down instinctively, and there she was, curled against her chest, sleeping soundly with her tiny mouth slightly open. Soraya exhaled, a shaky breath of relief. Her body still ached. Her stitches tugged with every movement. Her arms felt stiff from holding Zuri through the night. But this morning felt different, calmer, safer, kinder. The door was slightly ajar, and faint footsteps moved somewhere down the hall. Soraya listened for a moment, recognizing the quietness of a home that rarely had arguments, rarely saw chaos, rarely experienced the kind of emotional storms she had survived last night. Her throat tightened with unexpected emotion. Healing, even a small amount, feels foreign. She looked down at her daughter, brushing a thumb across her tiny forehead. We're okay, baby, she whispered, at least for right now. A soft knock came at the door, polite, patient, never intrusive. Soraya? Henry's voice was quiet. Are you awake? She cleared her throat, careful not to sound strained. Yes. He stepped inside slowly, carrying a tray with warm oatmeal, fruit slices, a bottle of water, and a herbal tea that steamed gently in the cool morning air. I didn't know what you'd feel up to eating, he said, setting the tray on the bedside table. But I thought this might help you regain a little strength. Soraya looked at the food, simple, comforting, not overwhelming, and her eyes warmed with gratitude. Thank you, she murmured. How are you feeling? Henry asked. Soraya adjusted herself slightly, wincing when her stitches pulled. Henry immediately stepped back, giving her space without hovering. I'm sore, she admitted. Everything hurts. But I've had worse mornings. He nodded with quiet understanding. I arranged for someone to assist you during the day. She tensed. He raised his hands gently. No names, no introductions. She won't interact with you unless necessary. Just someone discreet to make sure you don't strain yourself. Soraya stared at him, touched by the care but overwhelmed. You didn't have to do that, she whispered. Yes, I did, he replied softly. Recovery after childbirth is hard, even with a supportive husband. You were given the opposite. You deserve help. His voice stayed calm, but something heavy sat behind those words. Frustration on her behalf, compassion without pity, anger at the injustice she faced. He stepped closer to the bassinet. May I? He asked. Soraya nodded. Henry gently transferred Zuri from Soraya's arms into the bassinet. He moved slowly, careful not to disturb her newborn sleep. His hands were steady, his touch light, his expression soft with something close to awe. She's amazing, he whispered. She is, Soraya said, smiling weakly. She saved me. Henry turned toward her with a question in his eyes, but Soraya shook her head. I mean it literally, she continued. If I hadn't had her, I would have walked out of that hospital with nothing but pain. But holding her gave me something to fight for. She exhaled deeply. I'm not sure I could have kept moving if she wasn't in my arms. Henry sat in the chair near the bed. You kept moving because you're strong. Zuri is lucky to have you. Soraya didn't argue, but she didn't accept the compliment either. Not fully. Strength felt like something people said to survivors, because they didn't know what else to call endurance. She reached for the tea, sipping slowly. The warmth seeped into her, loosening the tightness in her throat. For a few minutes, They sat quietly. The kind of quiet that didn't demand conversation. The Ohio morning brightened gradually, casting soft gold across the carpet. Snow still rested on the trees outside, but the light made everything look gentler, softer. Soraya let her shoulders fall with a slow exhale. "Do you ever feel like your life split in half?" she asked suddenly. "Like there was the person you thought you were becoming, and then everything changed in a single night?" Henry studied her carefully. "Yes, more than once." "What did you do?" "I trusted time," he said, leaning back slightly, "and I gave myself permission to not have it all figured out at once." Soraya closed her eyes. The idea of time felt too big, too overwhelming. But something about Henry's tone made her believe she didn't have to solve everything this morning. He continued, "Your body went through something intense. Your emotions went through something even heavier. Healing isn't a straight line. But you're not walking it alone anymore." Soraya's chest tightened. She whispered, "I'm afraid of falling apart if I stop moving." "Then rest," Henry replied gently, "and let the pieces settle. You don't have to rebuild everything in a day." His words sank deep into her, deeper than she expected. Outside the window, a soft breeze moved the snow-laden branches. A car passed slowly in the quiet neighborhood. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked lazily. Life went on, even when hers had paused the night before. Soraya looked at her hands. They still shook slightly. They still held tension from the cold, from fear, from betrayal. But they weren't holding pain alone anymore. She looked up at Henry. "I don't know how to start over," she admitted. "You don't have to yet," he said. "Right now, you just need to heal." Soraya blinked back tears. Not the helpless kind, but the kind that come when someone finally acknowledges how heavy your life has been. She whispered, "Thank you for not treating me like I'm broken." Henry shook his head. "You're not broken. You're bruised. There's a difference." Silence stretched again. Warm, comforting. Zuri shifted in the bassinet, letting out a soft sigh. Soraya looked at her daughter, feeling something in her chest unclench. The morning sun washed over them gently, and for the first time in a long while, Soraya felt like the world wasn't closing in. Healing had begun. Quiet, slow, imperfect, but real. John's house was silent when he returned from the hospital. Not the peaceful kind of silence, but the uncomfortable kind that clung to the walls, the kind that made the air feel stiff, the kind that reminded him something was missing, or rather, someone. He closed the door behind him and leaned against it, his mind replaying the images from the hospital hallway. His mother's stern expression, his sister's judgmental glance, Soraya's face, shocked, exhausted, hurt, as she held their newborn daughter, her name, Zuri, tiny, fragile, innocent, and he had told them both to leave. John inhaled sharply, dragging a hand across his face. He didn't know what to do with the heaviness in his chest. It felt unfamiliar, an ache he didn't recognize until it settled deep inside him. He had listened to his family. He had trusted their voices over his own. And now, the house felt colder than the Ohio winter waiting outside. He walked into the living room. Everything looked the same. The furniture neatly arranged, the television remote on the arm of the couch, the framed photos on the wall. Nothing reflected the fact that his wife had just given birth, or that she wasn't here anymore. He swallowed. Shouldn't there be a crib, bottles, something? Instead, the house looked untouched, unlived in, as if family life had never begun here. His mother stepped into the living room a moment later, rubbing lotion onto her hands. She didn't look worried. Not even slightly. "You're back," she said casually, as though nothing monumental had happened. John stiffened. "Mom, I think I made a mistake." She raised a brow. "A mistake? Don't be dramatic. You did what needed to be done. That woman is too much. Always has been." John's jaw tightened. "She just gave birth." "And?" his mother replied, her tone dismissive. "Women have been doing that since the beginning of time. She'll be fine. It's better she leaves now than embarrasses you later." John stared at her, stunned. "Embarrasses me? She's my wife?" His mother scoffed. "For now. But a man like you could have done much better." Something in John cracked a little. He rubbed his temples. "She's the mother of my child. I should have been there. I should have held her hand. I should have held the baby. His mother's mouth tightened. Enough, John. You're letting your emotions cloud your judgment. He flinched at her tone. The same tone that had guided him since childhood. The same tone that always made him shrink instead of stand tall. He whispered, I left her alone. That is her problem, she said coldly, not yours. John felt something inside him choke. He stepped back, pulling away from her influence physically for the first time in years. No. I think it is my problem. His mother's eyes narrowed. You ungrateful boy. After everything I've done. But John didn't stay to hear the rest. He grabbed his keys again and walked out of the house, slamming the door hard enough for the echo to chase him down the driveway. He didn't know where he was going at first. He just got in the car, breathing hard, hands trembling. His thoughts churned violently in his head. How long had Soraya been outside? Was she okay? Was the baby warm enough? Why didn't anyone stop him? Why didn't he stop himself? Guilt wrapped around him like a tightening rope. He started the engine and pulled out of the driveway, driving faster than he should on snowy streets. I have to fix this. I have to fix this. He repeated the words like a chant, like a lifeline. By the time he reached the hospital, his heart was pounding in his throat. He jogged inside, barely registering the cold air that rushed through the automatic doors. The nurse at the front desk looked up. He blurted, My wife, Soraya Williams. Where is she? I need to speak to her. The nurse frowned, typing quickly. One moment. John tapped his foot anxiously. After a few seconds, she looked up again. She's discharged. He swallowed. I know. When did she leave? The nurse glanced at the screen again. Records show she left last night. There's no notation of accompaniment. John stiffened. She left alone? The nurse nodded. Yes. That's what the discharge record indicates. His stomach twisted. Do you know where she went? Did she ask for a cab? Did anyone help her? I'm sorry, the nurse said gently. There's no record of transportation. John felt dizzy. The nurse's voice softened. Is everything all right, sir? No, everything was wrong. Everything. He shook his head. I need to find her. He stepped outside again, the cold hitting him like a physical force. He looked left, right, around the parking lot, at the sidewalk where she once stood. Gone. All gone. His breath came out in uneven bursts. Panic crept up his spine. He pulled out his phone and called home. His mother answered. Did she come back? He asked, his voice strained. Of course not. She huffed. She knows better. John felt sick. He hung up without replying. He walked toward his car slowly, each step heavier than the last, until finally he stopped walking altogether. He leaned against a street lamp and pressed his forehead against the cold metal. His breath fogged the air in harsh bursts. How did I let this happen? He whispered. His guilt grew like a shadow behind him. Darker, heavier, impossible to ignore now that he was alone in the cold. The same cold he forced his wife and newborn daughter into. He looked back at the hospital entrance, hoping, stupidly, that he might see her walking out, cradling Zuri, forgiving him instantly. But the doors remained empty. Everything inside him tightened. His voice cracked as he whispered into the quiet air. What have I done? John sat in his car outside the hospital for what felt like hours, staring numbly at the snow-covered pavement. His breath fogged the windshield, and his mind kept circling the same questions. Where did she go? Is she warm? Is the baby safe? What did I just do to my family? The guilt ate at him, sharp and relentless. But so did something else. Fear. Not fear for Soraya's safety, though that lingered too. No, this was fear of consequences. Fear of how others would see him if they learned he had thrown his wife and newborn into the night. Fear of losing the image he had spent years maintaining. And in his panic, John made his second terrible decision. One that would twist the truth and shift the blame away from him, at least in his own mind. He walked briskly back inside the hospital and approached the same nurse he had spoken to earlier. Excuse me, he said, forcing a shaky voice. I think there's a misunderstanding. My wife hasn't come home. I don't know where she is. The nurse tilted her head sympathetically. I'm sorry to hear that. Would you like me to call security or... John shook his head quickly. No. I already checked outside. I'm just worried. She wasn't thinking clearly after delivering. She might have left confused. The nurse typed something into the computer. Well, our system shows she was discharged voluntarily. John swallowed the bitterness rising in his throat. Voluntarily. The word cut deeply. Not because it was true, but because it hid his role completely. What do I do? He asked, performing concern like a well-rehearsed act. Well, the nurse began gently. You can file a missing person concern with local authorities. Since she recently gave birth, they may categorize it as urgent if you explain she left without proper recovery. John nodded, eyes lowering, pretending to consider it. Even though an idea was already forming in his mind, a dishonest one, a convenient one that would make him look like the worried husband, instead of the man who pushed his family into the cold. Thank you, he said. I'll do that. He left the hospital, heart racing. Outside, snow crunched under his shoes as he walked to his car. Each step felt heavier, each breath sharper. His guilt was fighting with his pride, and his pride was winning the battle. He didn't drive home. He drove straight to the nearest police station. Inside, an officer greeted him. Not a new character, not named, simply part of the system. How can we help you? The officer asked. John took a deep breath, making his voice tremble just enough to seem believable. My wife, he said. She gave birth last night, and she's missing. I don't know where she went. I'm really worried. The officer nodded sympathetically. I'll take your statement. As they sat down, John carefully shaped the story to make himself look like the victim. She was emotional, he said, lowering his eyes. She insisted she wanted to leave. I tried to convince her to rest, but she wouldn't listen. I went home to get her things, but when I came back, she was gone. He phrased every lie as though it were wrapped in concern. He twisted facts until even he almost believed them. He made himself the caring husband. He made Soraya the unstable one. He disguised abandonment as worry. When the officer finished typing, he said, We'll reach out if we find anything. Hospitals sometimes have surveillance footage that might help. John nodded, then left. He knew the footage would never show the truth clearly. Only angles, shadows, doors opening and closing, and the discharge paperwork already framed the narrative in his favor. He drove away feeling sick, but safer. If people think she left on her own, I won't be blamed. If people think I'm the worried husband searching for her, no one will criticize me. If she comes back, I can twist the truth again. Or so he believed. Meanwhile, in Henry's home, the warmth of the guest suite wrapped around Soraya like a blanket. Zuri was nestled beside her, making soft breathing rhythms only newborns could make. The morning had been quiet, peaceful, something close to a fragile healing. When Henry stepped into the doorway holding his tablet, his expression was different this time. Hesitant, careful, almost conflicted. Soraya, he said softly, there's something you need to see. Her heart tightened. What happened? He sat in the chair beside her bed, turning the tablet screen toward her. News alerts were open. A headline glowed on the screen. Local man files missing person concern for wife and newborn, who left hospital last night. A photo of John accompanied the article, one where he looked somber, serious, almost heroic. Soraya's stomach dropped. She grabbed the tablet with shaky hands and read the short blurb beneath the headline. Concerned husband seeks help locating wife, who may be disoriented following childbirth. Her breath hitched. Disoriented? Concerned husband? Her hands began trembling as anger and heartbreak folded into each other. He's lying, she whispered. He's trying to make it look like I ran away. Henry leaned forward, voice gentle but firm. I know. And I'm the only person who witnessed what actually happened. The room seemed to tilt for a moment. He left me outside, Soraya said, the words heavy. He told me to go. And now he's pretending he tried to help? Her voice cracked, rising with disbelief. How could he? Henry's eyes softened with empathy, not pity. Because some people care more about protecting their reputation than protecting the people they claim to love. Soraya pressed a hand over her mouth, shaking with quiet anger. Everyone will believe him, she whispered. His family already hates me. They'll say I abandoned him. That I'm irresponsible. No, Henry said calmly. They won't get the final say. You're here. You're safe. You have witnesses, including me, and the truth isn't going anywhere. But Soraya wasn't thinking about the truth. She was thinking about the humiliation, the betrayal, the fact that John didn't just hurt her. He was rewriting the story to paint himself as the victim. Her chest tightened painfully. He's pretending to be innocent, she said, voice shaking. He threw me out hours after I gave birth. And now he's pretending he doesn't know where I am. Her eyes welled up. Not weak tears, angry ones. For the first time since leaving the hospital, her emotions weren't frozen. They were burning. Henry reached out, slowly, giving her time to pull away if she didn't want contact, and laid a hand gently over hers. You don't have to face this alone, he said quietly. Not anymore. Soraya looked at him, tears slipping down her cheeks. For the first time in a long time, she believed someone, not because he said the right words, not because she wanted comfort, but because he showed up, and he kept showing up. When the man she married chose to hide behind lies, the next 2 days passed gently within Henry's quiet home. Soraya slept in small intervals, fed Zuri with renewed steadiness, and began adjusting to a world that didn't constantly cut at her spirit. The guest suite still felt unfamiliar, but the warmth inside it, the peace, helped her breathe easier. On the third morning, something in her shifted. It happened when she sat on the edge of the bed, sunlight stretching across the floor, touching her bare feet. She felt a familiar urge rising, one she hadn't felt since before pregnancy, before arguments, before her confidence dulled under the pressure of John's household. She wanted to create again. Her sewing bag, worn from years of use, sat in the corner where Henry had placed it after retrieving the few things she had brought to the hospital. Soraya hadn't found the courage to unzip it yet. She wasn't sure if revisiting her passion would bring comfort or trigger memories of a life she thought she had built with John. But today, she took a deep breath and reached for it. Her fingers brushed the fabric handles. A small spark flickered in her chest. Fragile, but real. She unzipped the bag slowly, taking in the familiar scent of fabric and thread. The colors she had packed, deep blues, soft browns, warm golds, reminded her of the community she grew up serving through her craft. She pulled out a half-finished baby blanket she had been stitching for Zuri before the trauma of labor overshadowed everything. Soft cotton squares arranged in a gentle pattern, stitches she had once sewn with love. A project meant to welcome her daughter into the world. The moment she placed it in her lap, something inside her steadied. Henry appeared in the doorway then, pausing when he saw her holding the blanket. His voice was calm. You're stitching again. Soraya looked up, emotions rising unexpectedly. I think I need to. It helps me feel like myself. Henry stepped into the room, keeping a respectful distance, his hands tucked loosely into his pockets. I'm glad, he said softly. It looks good on you. Doing what you love. Soraya lowered her gaze, brushing her thumb over the edge of the blanket. It reminds me that I'm not just someone who was thrown out. I'm still me. Henry's smile was small, but warm. You never stopped being you, Soraya. You were just carrying too much pain to see it. She swallowed, touched by the sincerity in his tone. He gestured to the fabric. May I watch? She nodded, feeling a blush rise to her cheeks. Sure, but I warn you, it's not that exciting. Henry chuckled, a low, warm sound that felt like a small flame lighting the room. Watching someone do something they care about, he said, is never boring. The words made her chest flutter in a way that startled her. She lowered her eyes again, hiding the soft smile that tugged at her lips. She threaded her needle, carefully placing the next line of stitches. Her hands were a little shaky from everything she had endured, but the rhythm came back faster than she expected. Stitch, pull, stitch, pull. The pattern soothed her. Zuri slept peacefully in the bassinet near the window, tiny breaths rising and falling like a soft lullaby. Every now and then, Soraya glanced at her baby and felt the heaviness in her chest lighten. Henry watched the scene quietly. Soraya, working with gentle concentration, her daughter sleeping nearby, the morning sun casting a soft glow over everything. There was something deeply moving about the moment. "You're strong," Henry said quietly. Soraya didn't look up. "I don't feel strong. I feel like I'm barely surviving." "Surviving is strength," he replied, "and finding joy amid the pain. That's strength too." She paused, letting his words sink in. Then, unexpectedly, beautifully, Soraya laughed. It wasn't a big laugh. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was small, tired, warm. But it was the first real laugh she'd had in a long time. Henry's eyebrows lifted slightly. "What's funny?" She smirked softly. "You always say things like you're reading them out of a wise man handbook." Henry placed a hand over his chest. "I'll take that as a compliment." Soraya shook her head, laughing again, the sound loosening the stiffness in her body. Her shoulders relaxed, the weight she carried feeling just a little bit lighter. Henry watched her with quiet admiration. He wasn't falling for her, not recklessly, not irresponsibly, but he was remembering why he once cared so deeply. Her light, her spirit, her resilience. Even bruised, she carried something beautiful inside her, and Soraya felt something too. Not romance, not attraction, but safety. A type of safety she hadn't felt in years. She placed her needle down and exhaled. "It feels good to laugh again." Henry's voice softened. "You deserve moments that feel good." The subtle romantic energy between them hovered gently, not forced, not rushed, just present. A possibility, a warmth. Soraya took another deep breath and returned to stitching. She worked slowly but steadily, the blanket coming together again, as though her hands were repairing not just fabric, but small parts of her heart. When she lifted it to examine her work, the morning light illuminated the new line of stitches. Straight, clean, strong. Henry spoke softly. "That's beautiful." Soraya held the blanket close, a quiet spark of pride rising in her chest. "I think maybe I'm healing. Little by little." Henry nodded. "You are." For the first time since giving birth, Soraya felt a sense of forward motion, not forced by trauma, not dictated by fear, but shaped by her own hands. She was choosing herself, piece by piece, stitch by stitch. Her strength was returning, not as the loud kind people brag about, but the quiet kind that rebuilds a life from the inside out. And she wasn't doing it alone. The sun had barely dipped behind the Ohio rooftops when the quiet outside Henry's home shifted. What had been a calm afternoon, filled with light conversation, Zuri's soft coos, and the gentle rhythm of Soraya's stitching, was suddenly interrupted by the unmistakable crunch of tires pulling aggressively into the driveway. Soraya froze. Her needle paused mid-air. Her breath caught. Her heart stumbled painfully. She knew that sound. Henry, who had been reviewing documents on his tablet across the room, lifted his head immediately. His expression shifted, calm but alert, sharp enough to pick up the shift in Soraya's breathing. "Soraya," he said softly, "what's wrong?" She didn't answer. She didn't need to. A car door slammed. Hard. Henry stood instantly. Soraya's throat tightened. "He's here." Henry's face stilled, not with fear, not with anger, but with a controlled seriousness he rarely showed. "You stay here," he said gently. "Lock the door behind me." Soraya shook her head, panic rising. What if he forces his way in? What if he... "He won't," Henry said firmly. "This is my home, and you are safe here." Something about his tone, steady, unwavering, grounded her. Her voice trembled. "Be careful." Henry nodded once and stepped into the hallway. Soraya stood long enough to watch the guest suite door close before her knees began to shake. She rushed toward the bassinet where Zuri slept peacefully, oblivious to the tension tightening the air. Soraya placed a protective hand on her daughter's back and whispered softly, "You're okay. Mommy's right here." Down the hall, footsteps approached the front entrance. Then, a loud, impatient knock rattled the door. Henry reached it calmly, exhaling slowly before opening it. John stood on the porch, jaw clenched, eyes wild with a toxic mixture of anger, panic, and bruised pride. Snow clung to his hair and shoulders, melting into small droplets that ran down the fabric of his coat. He didn't say hello. He didn't ask permission to enter. He stepped forward aggressively, forcing Henry to block him. Henry didn't move an inch. Where is my wife? John spat. Henry raised a brow. Your former guest at the hospital? The one you left outside in the cold? John flinched. You don't get to twist this, he snapped. She disappeared, and I've been looking everywhere for her. Henry's expression didn't shift. She didn't disappear. You dismissed her. John's nostrils flared. I came to get her. And my daughter? Henry leaned one hand against the doorframe, not threatening, but unyielding. She's not your possession, John. You don't get to order her around after what you did. John stepped closer, fury burning behind his eyes. She's my wife. That's my daughter. And you have no right to keep her here. Henry remained calm. No one is keeping her. She's staying here because she feels safe. She can leave whenever she chooses. John scoffed. Safe? With you? His voice dripped disdain. Henry didn't rise to the insult. Yes, he said simply. With me. John jabbed a finger toward Henry's chest, but stopped inches short of touching him. You're trying to turn her against me, he accused. Henry's voice dropped. Colder, firmer. I don't have to. You did that yourself. John's face reddened. Where is she? In this house? Henry replied evenly. Recovering from childbirth. Something you abandoned her during. John opened his mouth, but the words tangled in his throat. His pride demanded he defend himself. But reality stood in the doorway with Henry's steady presence. You think you're some sort of hero, John snapped. Showing up, acting like you saved her? Henry tilted his head slightly. I didn't save her. I simply showed up when you didn't. John's fury cracked then. Not into softness, but into desperation. I need to see her, he said, voice trembling now. Please. Henry paused. For the first time, John didn't sound angry. He sounded afraid, but Henry didn't move. Not tonight, he said firmly. John's jaw dropped. You can't keep me away from Soraya. Henry's voice stayed level. I'm not keeping you away. You're not in a state to speak with her. You're angry. She's recovering. Your presence would cause harm. John took another step forward. Henry straightened, still calm but unmistakably protective. You will not push your way into my home, Henry said. You will not raise your voice here. And you will not speak to Soraya until she decides she's ready. John blinked, stunned. Henry continued. If you want to help her, the first step is accepting responsibility, not rewriting the story. John's face twitched. You think I don't feel guilty? Henry didn't soften. I think guilt is only real if it changes behavior. Last night, you chose your family over your wife. You let her walk into the cold after childbirth. And today, instead of apologizing, you filed a report pretending she's missing. John swallowed hard. How do you know about that? He whispered. Henry didn't blink. The same way the entire city will know if you continue lying. John staggered back half a step. Henry took a breath, grounding the tension. If you want to talk to Soraya, he said evenly, you will wait. You will calm yourself. And you will allow her space. John's voice cracked. I just want my family back. Henry's gaze softened only slightly. Then you should have kept them when they were in your hands. A silence pulsed between them. Cold, painful, honest. Then, a voice behind Henry, trembling but steady, cut through the air. Henry. Henry turned. Soraya stood in the hallway, wearing one of the soft robes Henry had placed in the suite. Her hair framed her face, her posture tired but brave. She held onto the wall slightly, still recovering physically, but her eyes were clear. John's breath hitched. Soraya. She didn't move closer. You need to stop, she said quietly. John blinked rapidly. Stop what? I'm trying to fix this. Soraya's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. The quiet firmness in it carried more strength than shouting ever could. You told me to leave, she said. You let your family humiliate me. You watched me walk out of that hospital holding our newborn, and you didn't stop me. John's eyes filled with something close to panic. I was overwhelmed. I didn't mean... No, she said firmly. You didn't care. John shook his head violently. That's not true. I made a mistake. Soraya's voice trembled, but her spine stayed straight. A mistake is forgetting to buy diapers, she said. What you did was abandonment. John stepped forward. Henry stepped slightly in front of Soraya, not blocking her, but placing a silent shield between her and the man who had hurt her. Soraya touched Henry's arm gently, signaling she was okay, then met John's eyes again. "I'm not going back with you," she said. "Not today. Not until I can heal. And not until you understand what you did." John's face collapsed into disbelief. "You're choosing him over me?" Soraya shook her head. "I'm choosing myself." Henry didn't speak. He didn't need to. Soraya's words carried the final blow. John stared at them, at the woman he had thrown away, now standing strong, and something in him shattered. He turned abruptly and stormed down the steps, snow crunching under his feet. He yanked open his car door, slammed it shut, and sped away, tires slicing into the icy street. The echo of his departure faded into the cold evening air. Silence settled. Soraya let out a shaky breath and leaned lightly against the wall. Henry stepped beside her, close enough to support, far enough to respect her space. "You handled that with more strength than he'll ever understand," Henry said softly. Soraya brushed a tear off her cheek. It didn't feel like strength. It felt like survival. Henry nodded. "Survival is strength." Soraya looked at him, really looked, and something in her expression softened. Not romance, not yet, but trust. The kind of trust she had almost forgotten existed. Night settled over Columbus with a quiet that felt almost unreal compared to the emotional storm that had just swept through Henry's home. The wind outside tapped softly against the windows, but inside the air finally felt calm again. Soraya sat at the edge of the guest suite bed, Zuri resting peacefully against her chest. Her eyes were tired, not just from the day, but from the months, maybe years, of holding everything together alone. Henry stood by the doorway, giving her space yet staying close enough in case she needed help. "You did well today," he said gently. Soraya exhaled, her voice soft. It didn't feel like it, confronting John like that. "I never imagined things would reach this point." Henry stepped closer, though still respectful of her boundaries. "You were honest. That's more courage than most people know how to show." Soraya didn't answer right away. She stroked Zuri's back and stared at the faint city lights outside the window. "I'm not used to standing up for myself," she admitted. "I always tried to keep peace, even when it cost me pieces of myself." Henry's gaze softened. "Choosing yourself isn't selfish, Soraya. It's necessary." For the first time in a long time, Soraya felt understood, but the peace was short-lived. A sharp buzz came from Henry's phone. He glanced at the screen, just a small frown at first, then a deeper one. "What's wrong?" Soraya asked, instantly alert. Henry hesitated a moment, not wanting to overwhelm her, but honesty had carried them this far. "You should see this," he said. He walked over and held the phone out to her. Soraya shifted Zuri to her shoulder and read the post displayed across the screen. Her heartbeat stuttered. There it was. John's family's account. Very public, very strategic, and very cruel. "We are heartbroken." Soraya abandoned her home and her newborn after an emotional breakdown. "Please keep John and baby Zuri in your prayers." The words hit her like ice water. Her breath caught in her throat, her vision blurred, not from tears, but from shock. "Abandoned?" she whispered, barely forming the word. "They're saying I left on my own?" Henry nodded once. "They're rewriting the story." Soraya stared at the screen, feeling her chest tighten painfully. "People will believe this. They'll think I ran away from my own child." Her voice cracked. "I didn't do anything wrong. I didn't abandon my baby." Tears formed, despite her attempts to blink them back. "I was thrown out. They watched me leave." Henry had seen many things in his life: corporate betrayals, financial losses, false accusations in business. But nothing made him angrier than seeing a good person attacked at their weakest. "They won't get away with this," he said. Soraya looked at him, breath trembling. "Henry, I can't fight them. I don't have the strength or the money or the voice for this. They'll paint me as unstable, as a bad mother." Henry's jaw tightened. "You're a wonderful mother. You carried Zuri each day with love. You protected her even when you weren't being protected. And you walked out of that hospital because you were given no choice. He took a slow breath to steady himself. I'm not going to let them destroy your name or your peace. Soraya swallowed hard. But what can we do? Henry's eyes held a type of quiet power Soraya had almost forgotten existed. The kind rooted in moral conviction, not ego. First, he said, you're not responding to anything tonight. You're healing. You don't need to defend yourself while you're still recovering from childbirth. Soraya wiped her cheek. People are already commenting, saying I left my baby, saying John is a hero for taking care of her. Henry stepped closer, lowering his voice. Soraya, look at me. She did. You were abandoned. Not just emotionally, physically, legally. I witnessed it. The hospital staff witnessed it, and no matter what John's family posts, truth has a way of surfacing. Soraya exhaled shakily. So what's the next step? Henry's tone became firm, not harsh, but protective in a way that made her feel anchored. I'm going to handle this legally. Her eyes widened. Legally? He nodded. What they posted isn't just manipulative. It's dangerous. It paints you as unfit, which could affect your child's future, your peace of mind, and even your safety. Soraya felt her stomach twist. Why would they lie like this? Why make me look like some kind of... Because they're afraid, Henry cut in gently. Afraid of taking responsibility. Afraid of facing public judgment. Afraid that people will learn the truth. Which truth? She whispered. That John threw you out of a hospital hours after childbirth. That his family encouraged it. That they shamed you instead of supporting you. And that they left you in the cold with a newborn. Soraya bit her lip, emotion tightening her throat. But I don't have proof. Henry gave her a knowing look. I do. She stared at him. You. Henry nodded. My foundation receives automatic updates. Your discharge happened under suspicious circumstances. Records show you left alone. No one accompanied you. No one checked you out except the nurse who asked if you had support. Soraya blinked, stunned. And that's enough? It's enough to challenge what they posted, Henry said, and enough to put pressure where it needs to be applied. He walked toward the window for a moment, gathering his thoughts. Soraya, I'm not trying to fight your battles for you, he said quietly, but I am offering to stand with you. You deserve that. A tear slid down her cheek, slow, silent, not from sadness but from the overwhelming unfamiliarity of being defended. I've never had anyone protect me before, she whispered. Henry turned back to her. You do now. The sincerity in his voice was something she hadn't felt in years. Steady, trustworthy, free of conditions. Soraya hugged Zuri closer, breathing in her daughter's soft warmth. Then another thought hit her. Henry, she said slowly, why would they lie publicly like this? Why risk being caught? Henry's expression darkened slightly. Because they're preparing for something. A small fear crawled up Soraya's spine. Preparing for what? Henry hesitated only a moment. For a custody narrative. Soraya's heart dropped. No, they wouldn't. John is desperate, Henry said calmly, and desperate people protect their image, even if it means hurting someone else. Soraya covered her mouth with her free hand, shaking her head. I can't lose my baby. I can't. Henry stepped closer, not touching her, but close enough that she felt supported. You're not going to lose, Zuri, he said firmly. You're her mother. You've cared for her from the moment she entered this world. And you have me now. I'm not letting anything happen to either of you. Soraya looked up, eyes glistening. Why are you doing all this for me? Henry held her gaze without wavering. Because you deserved protection long before tonight, he said. Because your strength deserves support. And because I care more than you know. Soraya inhaled sharply, her breath catching. For the first time, she didn't look away. A long, quiet moment settled between them. Safe, respectful, meaningful, not romantic, not rushed, just real. Outside, snow continued falling over Columbus. Inside, Soraya realized something she had never expected. Henry had been protecting her long before she even knew she needed protection. Morning settled over Henry's quiet home, with a gentleness Soraya hadn't felt in a very long time. Soft winter sunlight slipped through the curtains, landing across the guest suite, where she lay with Zuri, nestled against her chest. The warmth of the tiny body resting on her made her heart swell in ways she still couldn't fully explain. Zuri had grown stronger. That alone made Soraya smile every morning. Her breaths were steadier. Her cheeks were rounder now. Her tiny fingers curled tightly around the fabric of Soraya's shirt, as if reminding her, "Mama, I'm here. And you're doing fine." Soraya traced a thumb along Zuri's back and exhaled a quiet breath. Healing wasn't quick, and it wasn't tidy, but each day felt survivable now, and that was something she hadn't known in months. A soft knock touched the door. "Come in," she said. Henry stepped inside, dressed in a gray sweater and dark jeans. Simple but polished in that effortless way he always seemed to carry himself. His hair was slightly tousled, like he had run his hand through it a few too many times while thinking. That made Soraya smile without meaning to. "Good morning," he said warmly. His voice had a way of filling a room without overpowering it. "You two sleep any better?" She nodded. "A little. Zuri only woke me up twice." "That's progress," Henry replied with a quiet grin. It felt easy, talking like this, not forced, not complicated, not heavy, just comfortable. Henry stepped closer, but stopped at a respectful distance. "I made breakfast. Nothing fancy. Just eggs and toast. Thought you might be hungry." Before she could answer, her stomach answered for her with a loud growl. They both laughed. Her first real laugh in days. She shook her head. "I guess that means yes." "Perfect," he said. "Come down whenever you're ready. No rush." He turned to leave, then paused. "Oh. And the heat is turned up a little. I know Zuri sleeps better when it's warm." Soraya blinked, touched by the small detail he remembered. "Thank you, Henry." He nodded once and stepped out, closing the door softly behind him. As soon as he left, Soraya looked down at her daughter and whispered, "He pays attention. A lot more than anyone ever has." She gently lifted Zuri and carried her to the changing table. The morning routine they'd fallen into over the past days felt comforting now. Steady, predictable, safe. She dressed Zuri in a tiny lavender onesie, smoothing the fabric softly. "You like it here, don't you? All warm, quiet, peaceful." Zuri responded by letting out a small baby sigh and stretching her tiny arms. Soraya chuckled. "I'll take that as a yes." Once Zuri was settled in her arms again, Soraya made her way downstairs. The smell of breakfast drifted through the hallway. Warm, inviting. It reminded Soraya of her mother's kitchen back home on the east side of Columbus, where mornings always came with laughter, clinking pans, and aunties arguing about which seasoning belonged in eggs. But this home wasn't loud. It wasn't crowded. It wasn't chaotic. It was steady, supportive, kind. And that difference alone made her chest tighten with gratitude she didn't fully know how to express. Henry was plating food when she entered the kitchen. He looked up immediately, smiling in a way that made his eyes soften at the corners. "You made it," he said. "Thanks for breakfast," she replied. "Of course." He pulled out a chair for her, not to be showy, but as a simple gesture of care, and Soraya sat down with Zuri in her arms. Henry placed the plate in front of her, then stepped back to allow her space. "You want me to hold her while you eat?" he offered gently. Soraya hesitated. She had never let anyone outside her family hold Zuri, not once, not even the nurses longer than necessary. Her child was all she had left, the only certainty she trusted. Henry noticed the hesitation and didn't push. "Only if you're comfortable. She's safe with you. Always." Soraya looked down at her daughter, then at Henry. Steady, calm, patient. Something inside her shifted. "Okay," she finally whispered. "You can hold her." Henry's eyes widened slightly, almost as if he understood the significance of what she'd just allowed. His voice dropped lower, softer. "I'll be careful." She stood, passing Zuri into his arms. Henry cradled her with the gentleness of someone who respected the moment deeply. He supported her head perfectly, adjusted his stance instinctively, then smiled down at the tiny face looking up at him. "You're even smaller than I imagined," he murmured to Zuri. Soraya watched him, and warmth bloomed in her chest. There was something undeniably tender in the way he held Zuri. Not awkwardly, not like a man who wanted the mother's approval, but like someone who genuinely cared. She took a slow bite of breakfast, stealing small glances as Henry swayed gently with the baby. The scene felt unreal, not romantic in a rushed way, not forced, just a softness she had forgotten existed between two people. She finished half her meal before finally speaking. "You're a natural," Henry chuckled softly. "Hardly. I think she's just too polite to cry on me. She likes you," Soraya said before she could stop herself. She froze. Had she meant to say that out loud? Henry looked at her. Not smug, not assuming, just warm. "I like her too," he replied simply. The words struck deeper than he probably meant, and Soraya felt her cheeks warm. She looked down at her plate, hoping the moment would settle before her heart did something irresponsible. But Henry didn't step closer. He didn't flirt. He didn't push the moment. He respected the space while still making her feel seen. That alone made her chest flutter. After a few minutes, he carefully handed Zuri back. "She's getting sleepy again." Soraya accepted her daughter and pressed a kiss to her cheek. "Thank you." Henry nodded. "Anytime." There was a brief pause, not uncomfortable, but charged with something new, something budding, something unspoken. Soraya cleared her throat. "Henry, can I ask you something?" "Anything," he replied. She hesitated. "Why are you doing all this? Letting us stay here? Helping? Protecting me?" Henry took a slow breath, steady and sincere. "Because you deserve care. You deserve safety. And because I know what it looks like when someone is forced to carry everything alone." Soraya's eyes softened. "But this is a lot. Most people wouldn't do this." "I'm not most people," he said quietly. The way he said it, gentle, honest, without the slightest hint of arrogance, made her heart flutter again. She swallowed. "I don't know how to repay you." "You don't owe me anything," Henry replied. "Just take your time healing. That's more than enough." Their eyes held for a moment. Too long. Her heart thudded softly. For the first time since her marriage began to crack, Soraya felt something she thought she had lost forever. A sense of possibility. A sense of being valued, respected, cared for. A sense of being seen. Zuri stirred slightly, grounding her back into the moment. She looked down at her daughter and whispered, "Maybe life isn't done with us yet." Henry heard her, and though he didn't say anything, the faint smile on his lips told her he agreed. Soraya didn't fall in love that morning. Love was not careless. Love was not rushed. Love was not a rebound. But her heart opened, just a small crack, letting light enter places that had been dark for far too long. And this time, she didn't shut it out. The morning felt unusually calm after breakfast. The kind of calm Soraya didn't entirely trust yet. Calm always felt temporary in her life, like something waiting to be disrupted. She held Zuri gently, humming a soft tune her grandmother used to sing, letting her daughter's tiny breaths settle her nerves. Henry stepped out briefly to take a work call, giving Soraya space, something he'd gotten remarkably good at. She appreciated that more than she could ever express. She wandered toward the window, shifting Zuri to her shoulder. The snow outside glistened under a pale sky, coating the driveway and trees in a quiet blanket. She whispered, "It's beautiful, isn't it?" Zuri responded with a soft baby sound, something between a yawn and a sigh. Soraya smiled, but the peace fractured in the next heartbeat. A car slowed at the gate, then stopped. Her breath hitched as recognition struck her like a cold slap. John. He stepped out of the car wearing the same expression he had when guilt managed to overpower the arrogance he hid behind. Soraya felt the air tighten around her. She instinctively held Zuri closer, her pulse picking up speed. No, not today. Not in this house. Footsteps sounded behind her. Henry returned from his call, following her gaze out the window. One look at John and his jaw tightened slightly, though he stayed calm. "I'll handle it," he said quietly. Soraya shook her head. "No, Henry. I need to do this. I need to stand in front of him and not break." He studied her face for a long moment, making sure she wasn't forcing strength. When he saw the conviction in her eyes, he nodded once. "I'll be right behind you." Together, they walked to the foyer. Henry opened the door just enough for air to flow in, not enough to let tension flood the house. John stood at the bottom of the steps, hands shoved into his coat pockets, eyes bouncing between Henry and Soraya, like he didn't know who deserved his attention more. "Soraya!" he called out, voice strained. "Can we talk?" She adjusted Zuri, whose tiny body reminded her exactly who she needed to protect. Soraya stepped out onto the porch. Henry stayed behind her. Not intrusive, not imposing, simply present. John swallowed hard. "You look different." "I'm healing," she answered plainly. He blinked. "I came because we need to fix this. For the family image. People are talking. My relatives think." Soraya cut him off with a small, humorless laugh. "Family image? That's what brought you here?" "It's important," he said. "You can't just disappear. It makes everything look—" She raised a hand to stop him. "John, I didn't disappear. I was put out. And you know that." He flinched at her words. "I was stressed. I wasn't thinking clearly. My family." "Your family didn't speak for me," Soraya snapped. "They never cared how I felt. And neither did you." John stepped closer, carefully eyeing Henry behind her. "Why are you staying with him? He has nothing to do with this. This is our marriage. Our marriage ended the moment you left me outside that hospital with our newborn," she replied sharply. "Do not rewrite the story." John exhaled shakily, his face tightening. "I made a mistake. I panicked. But I'm here now. Shouldn't that count for something?" Soraya couldn't help the small ache that fluttered in her chest. Once she would have grabbed onto any scrap of affection John tossed her way. Once she would have apologized for things she didn't even do, just to keep the peace. But not anymore. She stood taller. "You're here because your image is falling apart. Not because of love." "That's not fair," he shot back. "It's accurate," she replied calmly. John turned toward Henry, frustration creeping into his voice. "And you? What exactly is your role here? Trying to play hero?" Henry didn't react emotionally. He kept his voice steady. "I'm here only because Soraya didn't deserve what happened. That's between us," John insisted. Henry shook his head slightly. "You made it public when your family posted lies about her." John's jaw twitched. "They were upset. They were dishonest," Henry corrected. "There's a difference." Soraya felt a quiet surge of gratitude for him. But she didn't lean into it. She wanted to prove she could stand her ground herself. She turned fully toward John. "You came here expecting me to take you back." He didn't answer, a silence that spoke louder than any apology. "You want things to look good again," Soraya continued. "But you never cared if they felt good. You never cared if I was safe, or warm, or supported. You only cared if other people approved of us." John looked down, shame slipping through the cracks in his expression. "Soraya, we have a child. We should raise her together." She hugged Zuri protectively. "You didn't want to raise her when she was 2 hours old. Don't come back now that there's backlash." His throat bobbed. "So you're just choosing him?" Soraya frowned. "This isn't about choosing anyone. This is about choosing myself, something I should have done years ago. Henry hasn't asked me for anything. He's given me space, respect, and safety. Things you never gave." John stepped back, as though her words hit him physically. "Please," he whispered, "don't end this." Soraya shook her head slowly. "It ended when you let your family decide my worth." He opened his mouth again, but Soraya lifted her hand once more. "John, listen carefully. I am done living in fear. I am done begging for the bare minimum. And I am done letting people who do not value me shape my life." Her voice didn't shake, not once. Henry remained behind her, steady, supportive, but silent. This was Soraya's moment. John looked at the ground, then back at her, then at Zuri. He reached out slightly, his voice cracking. "Can I hold her?" Soraya stepped backward on instinct. "Not today." "Why not?" he whispered. She held her daughter close. "Because love is protection. And until you learn that, you are not ready for fatherhood." Those words broke him. His shoulders slumped, and for the first time since the hospital, John looked truly defeated. Not by Henry, not by Soraya's strength, but by himself. He nodded weakly. I understand." He took a shaky step backward. "I'll leave," he murmured. "I just wanted a chance." "You had one," Soraya said gently. And another. And another. This is not revenge, John. This is closure. John turned, walked toward his car, and sat inside for a long moment before driving away. Soraya watched until the car disappeared beyond the gate. Her breath left her in a slow exhale. Henry stepped closer, but didn't touch her. You handled that with more strength than most people ever find in a lifetime. She looked down at Zuri, then at him. I needed to say it myself. I needed to hear myself say it. Henry nodded, pride visible in his eyes. You did more than speak. You reclaimed your life. Soraya felt something shift inside her. A release, a quiet victory, an opening she didn't expect. She whispered, I never knew choosing myself could feel this light. Henry's smile softened. That's because you were carrying weight that never belonged to you. Soraya met his gaze, steady, warm, unhurried, and for the first time, she didn't look away. Her heart didn't just open now. It stepped forward. The house felt different that evening. Lighter, quieter, freer. Not because John was gone, but because Soraya had finally claimed her voice again. She held Zuri close as she walked through Henry's warm home. Her steps slower now, but purposeful. There was a stillness in her spirit she had never felt before. Her heartbeat wasn't racing. Her mind wasn't heavy. And for the first time since giving birth, she felt safe, truly safe. She settled onto the large couch in the living area, laying Zuri gently across her lap. The baby slept peacefully, her tiny breaths rising and falling like a soft rhythm of hope. A few steps away, Henry stood in the kitchen doorway, watching without making her feel watched. A skill he seemed to possess naturally. Do you want tea? He asked softly. Or water? Tea would be nice, she said. He nodded and disappeared into the kitchen. Soraya watched him move from cabinet to kettle, methodical and calm. It was strange, comforting, how easily he fit into her day without ever overwhelming it. A few minutes later, he sat across from her with 2 mugs. The warm scent of mint filled the room. Thank you, she whispered. You're welcome, he said, his voice low and steady. They sat in silence for a moment, the kind of silence 2 people shared only when trust was beginning to root itself deep. Soraya took a sip, letting the warmth settle in her chest. Today felt like a turning point. It was, Henry agreed, but it was your turning point. No one handed it to you. She looked down at Zuri. I just want her to grow up in a world where she knows her worth. Henry's gaze softened. She will. Because she has you. Soraya felt her throat tighten. Not from sadness, but from being seen so clearly. She shifted slightly. Henry, I need to ask you something. Something I've been thinking about since everything started unfolding. Anything, he said. She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. Why did it feel like you understood my neighborhood? My struggles? My community? You stepped into things that weren't part of your world, yet you treated them with respect. Most people in your position wouldn't. Henry held her gaze for a moment, then looked down at his tea, turning the mug slowly in his hands. That's something I probably should have told you earlier, he admitted quietly. Soraya's eyebrows lifted. Told me what? Henry leaned back slightly, his expression thoughtful. Years ago, before you married John, you once mentioned you wanted to teach sewing classes to young girls in your neighborhood, a place where they could learn a skill, find confidence, feel supported. Soraya blinked, surprised. I barely remember saying that. It was just a thought. It wasn't just a thought, Henry said. I remember the way your eyes lit up, how passionate you were. You talked about wanting to build something that made life feel reachable for people who didn't have much. Soraya felt a gentle ache in her chest. It was a dream, yes, but life. It got complicated. Henry nodded slowly. After you got married, I stayed out of your life. I knew it was the respectful thing to do, but I never forgot what mattered to you. He paused, and I never forgot your community. She stared at him, trying to piece together where this was going. Henry continued softly. Over the years, I funded programs in your neighborhood. Quietly, anonymously. Sewing workshops, scholarship drives, food distributions. A mentorship initiative for young black girls who wanted to start small businesses. Soraya's breath caught. Her hand instinctively pressed against her chest. You did that? She whispered. Henry nodded once. It wasn't something I wanted credit for. It was just something that needed to exist. She felt tears sting her eyes. Gentle, quiet tears. Not of pain, but of something deeper. You supported my community? She asked again, voice trembling with disbelief. Yes, he said quietly, because you came from there. Because it shaped you. Because I always believed you deserved to live in a world where your people had the resources they needed. Soraya covered her mouth with her free hand as tears rolled down her cheeks. She wasn't crying because of the money. She wasn't crying because he had done something extraordinary. She was crying because he did something extraordinary and never told anyone. Because real generosity didn't ask for recognition. She whispered, Henry, why didn't you ever say anything? His voice softened even further. Because it wasn't about me. It never was. Your world deserved investment long before you ever needed help, and I never wanted you to feel like you owed me anything. Soraya let out a broken breath. No one has ever cared like that. Not even John. He married me, but he never cared about where I came from. Henry's eyes lifted to meet hers. Your roots are not something to look down on. They're your strength. They made you who you are. The room felt full. Not crowded, not overwhelming. Just full of something real. Soraya held his gaze. Henry, all this time, you were helping me without even being in my life. He shook his head gently. I wasn't helping you. I was supporting a community that deserved it. Your community. I just hoped it made someone's life easier along the way. Soraya stared at him, silent for long moments, because something in her heart finally clicked into place. Henry didn't show up at the hospital because she was weak. He didn't help her because he pitied her. He didn't stand by her because she needed saving. He did all of it because he always saw her worth, even when she didn't. She wiped her cheeks and whispered, You have no idea what this means. He smiled gently. I think I do. Just then, Zuri shifted in her sleep, letting out a soft sound. Soraya looked down at her daughter, this tiny piece of her life that began in pain, but was now surrounded by hope. She whispered, I want to build a future that feels gentle. A future where she grows up knowing love doesn't have to hurt. Henry spoke quietly. You can. And you don't have to do it alone. Unless you choose to. Soraya met his eyes again, and for the first time her gaze didn't hold fear or doubt or hesitation. It held choice, a real choice. She took a slow breath. Henry, I don't know what the future looks like. I don't know what pace I'm ready for. But I do know one thing. His heartbeat visibly steadied in anticipation. She continued softly. I'm not afraid of you holding space in my future. Henry's eyes warmed. Slowly, deeply. The way a sunrise doesn't rush but still fills the sky. He nodded. Then that's enough. We go at your pace. Soraya smiled. Thank you. Not just for the pace. Not just for the support. But for everything he had quietly done. Long before her world began to break. Zuri let out another soft sigh, and Soraya pressed a kiss to her forehead. She whispered, We're going to be okay. Henry heard it, and this time, she believed it. Would you have forgiven John? Comment below. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that heal, teach, and inspire.